Your first draft is messy, and it is meant to be messy. It's a light sketch. It is you learning the shape of your book. Your first draft is a hunk of clay. It is not a fired and glazed beautiful bowl or vase or whatever you made. Hello, beautiful neurodivergent creative friends. I am so glad that you are back, and I am also extremely happy to announce that we are back up to 4 episodes a month. It's April, it's my birthday month, and I do what I want. So here we are. The longer version of that story is that our Patreon is up to about $183 a month right now. So we're definitely still trying to raise funds there to support podcast production. But I was able to get a freelance contract that's going to cover like my basic salary, which means that I now have more money freed up for business expenses, which is going right into the podcast because I like to talk to you. So please support the podcast on Patreon so that we can keep doing this forever and ever, because I love being your honorary big sibster, your bestie, your chaotic audacity fairy godparent. It brings me great joy. Speaking of the Patreon, I'm going to go ahead and give our shout out to our April supporters. So these are people who have supported in March, which means you funded the April podcast episodes. So we have 23 Patreon supporters this month. We have Alexis, Amaris, Atan, Avery, Bay, Beth, Bird, Brennan, Casey, Shelb, Deidre, Emily, Frankie, Jacqueline, Jesse, Kitty, Max, Mia, Nell, Nicola, Samaya, Stephanie, and Teresa. So huge thank you to all of those people for being so supportive. And I believe I got a notification that some people have merch coming soon. So there's an exclusive sticker at the $9 level. After you support at the $9 You're a Real Gem tier for 3 months, you get a sticker. And there are a couple other tiers that have quarterly merch drops. So if you support for a year, you will get 4 different pieces of merch throughout that year. And I'm also thinking I might want to start like a birthday postcard thing. Undecided. But I've really been enjoying getting to know everybody who's supporting on the Patreon. I post a lot more like unpolished writing that's sort of more stream of consciousness and a lot more open about like my mental health struggles and growth and stuff there. And it's really resonating with people. There are a lot of people who are like, I really needed to hear this, or thank you for posting this, or this is great timing. And that tends to happen because I feel like we're all kind of going through it right now, especially in the US, like politically, it's a bad time right now for anybody different, anybody in the margins of any kind. So to stave off the horrors, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but once again, a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters supporting these 4 April episodes. It's also my birthday month, so I'm going to put an Amazon wish list in the show notes, and I would love for you to take a look at that. It's got a lot of stuff that helps me support the podcast. So like an external hard drive, a new microphone, headphones, a ring light, because I'm sure my producer would like me to in better lighting. There's some things like that. And then there's stuff that's just for me. Like purple pens and a cute notebook and the rest deck from what's that place called? The Nap Ministry. They have like a rest affirmation deck. And I was like, I feel like I need this. So I put together a little birthday list. Today we're going to talk about the sacred first draft. So this is like a concept that I have mentioned and I have taught on and I have spoken to for many years. And then last April, so a year ago, I actually made a whole like new page on my website, like a sales page for this membership I wanted to start called the Sacred First Draft Society. And then my mental health just fell off a cliff. And so for the last year, I have been like, sure wish I had done that. Sure wish I had done that. But hey, we're back. I'm climbing now out of the abyss and I'm dusting that thing off. So I want to start talking more about this sacred, spiritual, honestly, relationship between a writer and the first draft of their story. Because writing is not just getting a book deal. Writing is not just a finished work. Writing is not your 5-star reviews. Writing is not your 1-star reviews. Writing is an ongoing practice. And I believe that creativity is part of our spiritual practice as human beings. We are creative. We tell story. We make art. We just write that we were here, we were being alive. And I love that. I love the marks of humanity throughout history. Like, even if it's, a love letter that's now in a museum because somebody found it in their attic and was like, this is a love letter that my great-great-great uncle sent to my great-great-great aunt when he was in a war. And we get to see the ways that, like, even through this lens of history, like, we look at, during whatever war, that was bad. In a history book, we learn what happened to industry, the death toll. We learn the dates of the battles, but we never really stop and think that these people had lives. And so when we write things down, we are connecting with a very human thing. We are connecting with the storytelling energy of generations and generations of human beings who wrote words down. And yeah, in the age of social media, a lot of the words that we write down are kind of silly. I look back at my 2008 Facebook memories. They're not great. It's not masterpieces, but it's aliveness. And that's something that you're going to hear me talk about a lot more, is this whole concept of aliveness. And I like calling it aliveness rather than like survival or being alive or any other way I could talk about it that's like passive, because I want to participate in being alive. It is not enough to breathe and to eat and to drink and to rest. I want to participate in my life. And that's something that I have been having a really hard time with. Definitely last year when I fell into that depression that was side effects from an antidepressant I was on, which is horrible. I hate that if you're on the wrong antidepressant for your particular brain soup, it can make your depression worse. That seems wrong. I hate that. I hate that that is a thing that happens. But it did. It did happen. So I was on a med for a year and a half before I was like, maybe this horrible way that I feel is related to that. So I talked to my doctor and she was like, yeah, we're going to get you off of that. And then I felt kind of foolish and bad about myself that I hadn't like figured it out yet. Like, I should have noticed right away. But it's subtle. It's subtle as we lose ourselves, and it's also subtle as we come back to ourselves. Because I've been on that track now for several months. I started Wellbutrin in December. So that was when I first started this change on my medication, and now we're in April. It's 4 months later. I feel so much more like myself. I feel like I am participating in my aliveness. And that has also made my creative practice so much more fulfilling, because now I can just sit down and be like, I feel like making a collage. I feel like doing a painting. I did this truly ugly little painting the other day and I posted it on Instagram and I was like, this is bad. And I'll send it to you if you support me on Patreon. Like I'm like normalizing bad art, and normalizing bad art is related to the first draft, because your first draft is messy and it is meant to be messy. If you are afraid of your first draft, if you are writing it and you're like, well, this sucks, this is not a good book, and that's confusing you because you've always been like a pretty good writer. Maybe you've written blogs, or you've written an article, you've gotten a short story published somewhere, you've written poems, you won an award in high school, you always got A's on your papers. Writing a book is so different, because for all those like smaller scale things, and they are smaller, like just writing a whole book is like this huge ethereal nebulous thing. You can't really condense it into a super straightforward process. And if you can, I think it's missing some of the aliveness, honestly. But I don't know. That's just my perspective as an autistic person with ADHD and the way that I relate to my writing. Hey friend, it is time for another round of novel parkour. This time it's going to be a free 3-day workshop. In just 3 days, you're going to be able to take your epiphany, the thought that you had in the shower, and you will have it turned into a pretty robust outline that has enough structure to keep you moving forward on your first draft, but also enough room that you can be flexible when it comes to figuring out how to move from scene to scene, or if you have a plot hole, you're going to learn how to not get stuck in that plot hole. So this is specifically designed, because I have ADHD, for ADHD writers. So the autism wants a plan, the ADHD wants to frolic, and novel parkour is like my secret ingredient somewhere between plotting and pantsing is novel parkour. This is an approach that helps you Put flexible boundaries around your writing process to complete your first draft without getting bogged down in super niche details and having to know exactly what genre you're writing in. And through this process, you're not only going to come away with resources to actually write your outline and get to know the details of your book and have sort of a framework for how to build those details, but you're also going to come away with the knowledge that your first draft will be messy, and that's actually perfectly according to plan. So please come join me. We are going to be spending 3 days together in May 2025. It's the 16th through the 18th. You can go ahead and grab your spot on my website, and then I'll see you in May. Novel parkour. It's going to be awesome. But the first draft is going to be a mess. It's a light sketch. It is you learning the shape of your book. Your first draft is a hunk of clay. It is not a fired and glazed beautiful bowl or vase or whatever you made. A mug. I don't care. We're in a kiln now. Get out of the kiln. So all you need to do is get a lumpy story as your first draft. That is all the first draft is supposed to be, is kind of a blob, the shape of the story that you want to tell. And then you go in and then you can start to refine and revise. And now it is becoming something that is more of a product, more of something to be offered to others for their consumption of the story. But that is not what the first draft is for. The first draft is for you and the story to get to know each other, to build trust. Like imagine if your story, I'm going to anthropomorphize it for a second, okay? You meet your story idea and you're like, hey, I'm kind of interested in you. You're kind of flirting with your story idea. And then your story idea says something that's like not quite what you had in mind. And then you're like, I don't actually want to see you anymore because red flag. I can't do it anymore. You did something a little weird. You didn't really think that part through. I'm not sure what your character motivation is. You start picking it apart before you have had a chance to even get to know it. And that's not my best metaphor because you can and should reject people who make you uncomfortable. Like you don't have to entertain people doing stuff that you don't like. But remember that we are cultivating trust here between you and something that is of you, something that came from your mind, your heart, your spirit. Your story idea is on your team. You are a team and your story idea is here and it wants to become a shape. And it also trusts you to turn it into that lump of clay, to turn it into that rough sketch. Your story idea is in your head being like, hey, are you going to write me? Are you going to write me? Are you going to write me? When you keep telling it no, that breaks the trust. And it's a very sacred bond between you and your first draft, between you and your story at all. But the first draft especially, because you can't get to a final draft without writing the first draft. You cannot become a bestseller unless you let your first draft exist. And that's all it has to do is exist. All you have to do is write some words down and let it exist because you can't edit a blank page. You can't revise a story that doesn't exist. And you are never, ever going to just get it right on the first try. You're not going to write a perfect manuscript. First of all, it doesn't exist. Second of all, if one person in the whole world was touched by God and was able to make a perfect manuscript, why do you think it's you? And I know that kind of flies in the face of me always being like, you're special, you're unique, you're wonderful. And you are special and unique and wonderful. But we are also humans. And we are also programmed by societal norms and expectations and judgments and what our third grade teacher said and the way our mom told us that writing wasn't a real career and like all these layers and layers and layers that have distanced you from your creative intuition, from that sacred relationship of just knowing that creativity is playful. You have to play with the story. You build it. You can't just say like, oh, I'm going to write this story, but it's actually kind of more deeply about this societal thing going on. And like, yeah, there's layers and there's layers and there's layers. You're not going to get all those layers on the first try. If you're learning how to bake a cake, maybe start with like a boxed cake mix. Or if you've already mastered boxed cake mix, maybe make a homemade cake that's like one layer, right? Like make a sheet cake, birthday cake. Before you start doing stuff like trying to make fondant roses and like, man, I tried to make this cake that looked like a unicorn, and it was so ugly. It was so ugly because I didn't know how to make cake look pretty. Like, I just watched a bunch of cake videos and was like, okay, I can probably do that. No, you got to practice. You got to practice those skills. You cannot just make one cake and totally nail it. It was bad. I'm glad I don't have children, because if my child was like, I want a birthday cake that's a unicorn, and I made that, I would have like traumatized my child with this very ugly unicorn cake. It's probably an exaggeration, but I really would have disappointed that kid. I don't want to disappoint my imaginary kids. So I do not go around saying that I'm a baker, but I am a writer. Because I keep practicing, because I don't expect my writing to be perfect the first time it comes through me. You are a conduit for the story. It's you and this idea and the universe, and you all get together and the universe is like, okay, here you go, write it. And if you keep stopping and saying like, well, that's not good enough. I need this detail. I need to do more research. I need to do this. Like, how many things do you need to have perfectly ready before you will write this book? You're allowed to just mess around and play around and go build in a sandbox. Actually, there's a great Jordan Peele quote. So Jordan Peele says, when I'm writing the first draft, I'm constantly reminding myself that I am simply shoveling sand into a box so that later I can build castles. That is exactly it. You're just getting your supplies. You're just getting the shape of the thing. And you have to trust it because it's trusting you. And you can mess up that relationship. Your story is a neutral object. Your story isn't going to damage this relationship. Your story simply is what it is. But you and your beliefs and your behaviors and your actions that you take toward this story will either support or break trust with the ethereal concept, the spiritual ethos of your story idea. So I know I'm getting a little woo-woo, and I don't care because that's who I am as a person. So you have to deal with it. But yeah, that story, it's going to stay, it's going to stick around. But some people find that their ideas sort of leave them, or they change, or they're more dull, and they sort of fizzle out. And I don't want that for you. I want your idea to still be there, which means that you have to kind of feed it and water it sometimes. It is kind of like a house plant, you need to take a look at it. You need to make sure that it's not overgrowing its pot. It's not suffering. But for the most part, you can just give it some water, put it in the window, and it's good. It's good to go. Pretty minimal effort required to keep your story alive, to keep your story trusting you, to keep the spirit of your story connected to the spirit of you as the writer. So those are my thoughts, the sort of introduction to the sacred first draft concept. This is something that I will be teaching in May. I'm doing a 3-day workshop called Novel Parkour. I did it once before, and it was pretty awesome. Actually, I've done it twice before. So this is my 3rd time doing a live novel parkour. It is my most popular writing workshop. I've had over 200 people go through it, and a lot of people, some people sign up for stuff and then they don't come. So I can't speak to their results. But the people who show up and do the work and do the worksheets and the brainstorming and show up and ask me questions on the call to get coached on their outlines, they're coming away with real tangible outlines for stories that they can then go and write the first draft for. So I will help you. I will help you believe in your capacity to write your first draft over 3 days in May. So you should go sign up for that. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's all I got for you right now. So I'll see you next time.
They'll change your approach and tell you a joke to lighten your load and help you along or sing you a song. Do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do.